Alright, welcome everyone. Welcome to another video in the series of Ancient History of Bharat. Let me just set up the mic. Sometimes it's too loud, sometimes it's not so loud, so I have to be very careful with the mic. Okay, I hope everyone is doing well. Everyone is enjoying this series of Ancient History of Bharat. Again, like I said, there are multiple, it's too difficult to comprehend the history of our country, mainly due to number one is the destruction of the sources of history that we have had. Our libraries have been burned down to the ground, so we don't exactly have much of the primary sources that were the sources of history of our country have been burned down. And again, we'll not get into it, otherwise, yeah, it becomes political and whatever. So today we are going to again cover a little bit of the previous chapter that was left, religion and philosophy. Let me just pull up what was left. I really need a bigger desk, but fine. Let me finish my coffee. All right. Now, this is something that I found very interesting. It has to be interesting to you as well. What is the philosophy of life according to us Aryans? Okay, there are many people who are really fond of asking this question: why are we even? Okay, why do we exist? What is the whole purpose of living your life as a pagan, as an Aryan? Okay, so the answer to that question is already mentioned in our Samhitas. All right. Now, one very clear answer to that is life is a duty and a responsibility. Life is a duty and a responsibility is the central ethical teaching of the Brahmanas. When I say Brahmanas in the literary sense, as in the commentary on the Vedas, the books. Okay. Man is born with certain rina or debts which he must discharge in his life. He has a debt to pay to the gods, to the rishis, to the mains, to men, and to the other creatures. And he discharges these debts if he worships the gods, studies the Veda, performs funeral ceremonies, is hospitable to guests, and offers oblations to the Bhutas. Okay, here the idea, okay, once when a man is born, he is born with a debt. Okay, debt to whom? Debt to your motherland. Okay, keep in mind this concept of motherland is exclusively other faiths did have this idea of holy motherland, but none of them exist now thanks to the monotheists. They have either managed to convert them or drive them away from religion altogether. Okay, so this concept of holy land, okay, in the contemporary age only exists amongst the pagans of Bharat. Okay, because we consider this land as holy. Okay, now where does that thought come from? Why do we consider this land as holy? Because since we are born on this land, we are born with a debt, and that debt we must discharge that debt all through our life. And there are certain ways in which you can discharge those debts that have been mentioned in the Samhitas. Okay, so this is the philosophy of a man's life. If you are born on this holy land of Bharat, from the very moment that you are born, you are indebted. Okay, that is your duty. Your life is a duty to discharge that debt to your motherland. All right, and that is where our idea, that is where our notion of nationalism comes from, because we are hell bent on repaying that debt. Okay, but in the contemporary world, in the modern world, if you talk about nationalistic feelings or nationalist sentiments, okay, the media scenario in our country has been created as such that being a nationalist is a bad thing in our country. You cannot speak good of your nation. You can only speak good of a flimsy idea that is India. Dare you speak anything about Bharat and people will cancel you all across social media. Before you know it, your YouTube channel will be blocked, Instagram page will be hacked and whatnot. So that is the whole point of or that is the source or the inception of the idea of nationalism of Bharat. Okay, when we are born, okay, there is a debt, okay, that this holy land has given us the birth, and hence all through our life there are some duties that you need to undertake to discharge that debt before you leave this land. Okay. The theory that confession implying repentance somewhat mitigates the guilt is seen in the Satpatha Brahmana. The inner purity was insisted on as much as external purity. Truth, performance of dharma, that is duty. Which duty? Your duty that requires you to discharge the debt, that is dharma. Okay. Respect for parents, love for fellow beings, and abstinence from theft, adultery, and murder were the sine qua non of a good life. Okay. I know, right? 5,000 years ago, this might be a little too much to ask for. Alright. But yes, the ideal to which a common man was raised in during the Rig Veda, during the Rig Vedic times was pretty high. It was not easy for you to exist as a man, and to this very day, it's not easy for you to exist as a man, as a pagan man, no less. Okay, because you will be judged left, right, and center. Your gods will be made fun of. Your rituals, your sacrifices, everything will be called superstition, and you'll not be allowed to express yourself freely and completely. You can only express yourself as long as this definition of secularism allows you to express your identity. The moment you flirt with that line of secularism, that is again a flimsy idea of secularism, you will be hurled with expletives and labels such as communal bigot and hate mongerer, hate preacher, and whatnot. That is the sad state of media in our country. Okay. Now I am not going to convince you, because if you still don't see it, probably it will be very late when you see it. When the missionaries have already arrived at your doorstep and they give you only two options. You either convert or either you die. Okay. However, the wicked are described as being born again in the next world, suffering the punishment which their misdeeds bring upon them. The man is the architect of his own fate, becomes a perfect truth according to this theory. Now, since after the Rigvedic times, okay, this notion, okay, that whatever you do in this life, you have to repent for everything that you do in this life on this very earth. Okay, and if, let's say, things are not changing, the tide is not turning in your favor, that is due to the deeds that you did in your previous birth. Okay, so this, many scholars agree that this is the inception of the idea of reincarnations and the continuous cycles of births and deaths. Okay, but there is no evidence to say that these things already did not exist in the past, because like I have mentioned, all these things before getting mentioned or before being written down were practiced for centuries. And how many years prior to that were they perfected through the process of trial and error? We don't exactly know. Okay, because the amount of primary sources that we have are very limited. Okay. The Brahmana doctrine, again the literary Brahmanas, not the priestly class. Okay, the Brahmana doctrine that whatever food a man consumes in this world, in return consumes him in the next world, but the transfer from the physical to the moral plane of law, that action and reaction are equal and opposite. Okay, funny, what made this fellow who goes by the name of, what's his name, Newton, think of a law? One of the laws of his motion states that every action is an equal and opposite reaction. Yeah, okay, it's going to take for a lot of people, it's going to bust that myth inside their head that it was Newton who came up with these laws. Okay, there were widespread and pretty heavy efforts made by the church to popularize the image of Newton. Hence, okay, so hence whatever you believe these days, okay, it is highly likely that there was a bigger role of church to be played to popularize these theories. Okay. So the Brahmana doctrine, yeah, okay, this I read. Similarly, the enjoyment of the rewards, which is an exact measure to the good deeds performed, must sometime come to an end. Thus, there is the prospect of rebirth again for both the pious and the wicked. Okay, so even if you do good deeds all through your life, okay, so that I would say, how do I put this into words? Okay, so your entire deposit of good deeds will exhaust one day. Okay, so that will again give rise to a new birth. So the concept of rebirth was not just for the people who committed bad deeds, it also existed for the people who committed good deeds. Okay, and this is where this idea of Buddhism came in, that you need to, you know, escape this unending perpetual cycle of births and rebirths. So arises the wonderful conception of a beginningless and an endless circuit of birth and death, the so-called samsara, or the bondage of life and death. Okay, this is something interesting. When I was reading this for the first time, I actually stopped for 10-15 minutes to contemplate on this thought. Okay, let's see if you guys find this very interesting or not. Okay, the first let me read the paragraph, then I'll see if it makes sense to you or not. Right, let me just take this last gulp. Do you call it a gulp? Last sip of coffee. All right. The first desire and then its fulfillment is a vicious cycle. With this very first line led me to think a lot about it. Here it says, the first desire and its fulfillment. When you are born, okay, what was the first desire that you have or you had? Okay, what was the first desire that you had when you were first born on this planet Earth? We don't know, because our memory does not allow us to go so far back in time. It's probably stored somewhere in your subconscious, but definitely when you took birth and when you started living on this planet, you started breathing, you started metabolizing oxygen and everything else, there was a very first desire. Okay, and the fulfillment of desire, that is where everything starts. Okay, because your subconscious gets used to it. Okay, this yearning of this wanting to fulfill all the desires, where does it come from? There has to have been a first desire. Okay, so when I was reading this for the first time, I stopped actually for 10-15 minutes and started contemplating what could have been my first desire. So if you're watching this video, I would really urge you to pause it right now and also think about your first desire. If indeed you remember, almost all of you, I don't think you guys will remember, but how far back in time can you think and think your, at least, the first 100th or let's say 200th desire, and it got fulfilled. Okay, and you enjoyed that experience, you enjoyed that outburst of emotions that fulfillment of emotions brought, fulfillment of desires brought to you, and again you crave that outburst of emotions, and hence it's a constant cycle of having a desire, fulfilling it, again craving that feeling, again having a desire, fulfilling that desire. So it's an unending cycle. Okay, so the first desire and then its fulfillment is a vicious circle, and the only escape from it is desirelessness induced by true knowledge. This, however, is the main doctrine of the Upanishads and is only adumbrated in this period. For example, when the Satpatha Brahmana asks the seeker for truth to meditate upon the self, made up of intelligence and endowed with a body of spirit, a form of light, and an ethereal nature, the doctrine has a speculative but nonetheless ritual background. Similarly, the building of the fire altar, symbolical of the reconstruction of the universe in the shape of Prajapati. Alright, so in order for you to get rid of this, unceasing cycle of birth and death, you must, enter this mindset of desirelessness. It's, it's way harder than you guys might contemplate, because there cannot be, even if you live a minimalistic life, you in the at the end of the day you will still have some or the other desire. So I this is where my profound disagreement lies with our ancestors, with the philosophy that our ancestors, practiced. Okay. And yeah, so that's the beauty, like I said, that's the beauty of my faith and my belief system. I am allowed to disagree with the collective wisdom of centuries. Okay. Next were the Aranyakas. Okay, like we have discussed in our earlier times, Aranyakas were the texts that were written in the forests, as the word suggests, Aranya. Okay. So the people, they were pretty much fed up with the excessive rituals that had accumulated in the Aryan faith, and due to excessive accumulation of power in the hands of the priests. Okay, so they wanted something else for themselves, and hence you come up with the Aranyakas. Okay, the occult and the mystical nature which could be imparted to the initiated only in the privacy of the forest. Okay. Important service was rendered by the Aranyakas when they stressed the efficacy of the inner or the mental sacrifice, as distinguished from the outer of formal sacrifice, consisting of oblations of rice and barley milk. This is where the transition happens. Okay. So there was some sort of a faith or a belief system that was practiced, okay, at the very beginning. Okay, all these traditions were carried down orally. Then, let's say, centuries and millennia of practice, somebody thought that we should write these things down. And when eventually the rishis and all of them, they came down to writing it, it had already been perfected, and some sort of perversion had already percolated into the faith. Okay, so that was when the Rig Veda was written. Okay, now again from the Rig Vedas there was transition towards the Brahmanas, meaning the literary texts. Okay, after the Brahmanas again there were the Aranyakas. So this last stage of Aranyakas, that is what details and elaborates about the current faith that we practice. Okay, the pujas and the havans in the current form that we do have been mentioned in the Aranyakas. How? Because here it says that the oblations of rice, barley and milk. Now there were no sacrifices, there were only oblations, as in offerings of rice, barley and milk. Okay. The Aranyakas further lay down upasanas, as in the courses of meditation. How exactly are you should meditate? I don't exactly know, but yes, if you get around reading these books, the methods of meditation have been enlisted in the Aranyakas. The compromise between the two ways of karma and gyan was consummated when karma was made subsidiary to and a preparatory stage for jnana in the Aranyakas and the Upanishads. Okay, so there has to be a two-way approach in your life. Okay, one is right knowledge, another one is right action. Okay, gyan and karma. So those were the two pillars. All right, but on top of that there is still further one more theory. Okay, knowledge must be given primary status and action must be given a subsidiary status, not secondary, subsidiary status, meaning whatever action you take must be backed by solid intelligence. When I say intelligence, I mean solid knowledge. Okay, so yes, that is the end of chapter number 22. Now we will move on to chapter number 23. Okay, the title of that chapter is Social and Economic Conditions. So let's go on to the social conditions, the family life, Kula. Okay, system of individual families, each consisting of several members under the headship of father or the eldest brother, to whom belongs the Kula, originally home or house of the family, then by metonymy the family itself. Okay, now you will see that the word kul, ye kul, hum ye kul se hai, hum wo kul se hai, you might have heard this very frequently from people. Okay, what exactly did that word mean? That word in essence meant just the family. That is what kula meant. Okay, The father, as a rule, did not arrange the marriage of his son or the daughter. This is something that came as a surprise to me, because the Jaiminya Upanishad mentions this, that the father, as a rule, did not arrange the marriage. So where did this idea of arranged marriage came from? Because so far I have believed that this idea of arranged marriage has been carried down since centuries. But here in the Jaiminya Upanishad it says it was not the father who arranged their marriage. So let's see, the caste system. Again, the vocabulary itself in the very beginning is false. Okay, the caste is a Portuguese word, so we'll use the term varna. Okay, the system of varna, whose beginnings can be traced in the broad fourfold classification of society in the Rigvedic age, developed during this period in various directions. Okay, so you'll have to understand the time scale. I'm again going to repeat for the people who don't really understand the time scale in which the history of this country functions. Okay, right at the very beginning there was this pristine form of faith that was practiced by our forefathers who were Aryans. Okay, their tradition was oral transmission of everything, oral transmission of history, oral transmission of hymns and whatnot. There was no written form. All right, now after centuries on centuries, and I would say probably millennia of practice, okay, some people had this idea of putting it down into writing, because carrying it carrying it in the form of oral traditions wasn't exactly fruitful. All right, so that happened. Somebody wrote it down. Next, after the Samhitas, all the four Rig, Sam, Yajur and Atharva, all the four Samhitas, there came the Brahmanas. Brahmanas as a literary sense, as the commentaries upon the Vedas. Okay, we don't exactly know how many centuries of time elapsed between the Samhitas and the Brahmanas. After the Brahmanas, there were the Aranyakas. After the Aranyakas, there were the Upanishads. So we don't exactly know how much time elapsed between these two. So we have to assume there was centuries worth of time between each, and there were some perversions and modifications introduced based on the exigencies of the time, based on the social structure of the time. So the Varna system as we know it today, the Varna system as we know it today came into being, or rather the corruption inside the Varna system started during the last phase, that was the between the Aranyaka and the Upanishad phase. All right. Guilds of workers tended to crystallize into castes as occupations became more or less hereditary. As examples, we may cite the chariot makers, the smiths, the leather workers, and the carpenters. Alright, so yes, guilds of workers, they organized themselves into a similar caste. So you might have observed this. Okay, it's very much pretty prevalent all across our country. If there is a group of community that organizes itself into a caste, okay, almost always they will have similar professions. Do you think this is a coincidence? If not, why have you not done some research about it? Or do you blindly believe that the way Britishers classified it, that's the way it's supposed to be? Who is to blame for this ignorance? This is something for you to think and ponder about when you're sitting free and sitting idle. Alright? So obviously human nature is to compete. All the four Varnas were competing against each other. This is our history and system of classification is no different from all the other all the other parts of the world. The only difference is they figured it out centuries and centuries later. We had already figured it out. So by the time they figured out, we were already reeling under the consequences of competition between the different Varnas. You'll see that if you have, if largely the schools in our country that teach history of World War, but what they don't teach is social mobilization during these world wars. How did different stratas of society mobilize itself? How were majority of the communities were involved with the military during the world wars? Well, this is something that you should explore. Okay, World War was not just about fighting wars. There were also societal changes. There were also changes in the fabric of the society. Who were the bourgeoisie? Who were the top, elites, the nobles? Okay, you should say, read this. It's not a rocket science. It's not as complicated as your history teachers makes it out to be. Once you read it, you realize what actually it is. All right. Now, one very interesting paragraph, okay, that made me also want to stop and contemplate is, now I'm going to read that paragraph first. That paragraph is on page number 454. Okay, it says, if, for example, the Satpatha says that a Sudra is not worthy of being addressed by the consecrated person, the stories of Satyakama Jabala and Janasruti in the Upanishads show that the teaching of philosophy was not withheld from him. The Sudra cannot milk the cow for the Agnihotra milk according to the Kathaka Samhita, but the Satpatha Brahmana gives Sudra a place in the Soma sacrifice. Okay, and the Taittiriya Brahmana prescribes formula for establishing the sacrificial fire for the Rathakara, also who was counted as a Sudra. Okay, so if at all there were some problems, okay, problems of competition between all the four Varnas. Now I'm not completely denying that there was perfect harmony between both the Varnas, okay, but there was also not perfect animosity between all the Varnas. You cannot assume that all the four Varnas were perpetually against, in a state of war against each other. That's wrong for us to assume. However, I am willing to concede that yes, all right, there might have been problems, there might have been class struggles, because the human nature is such. Okay. So yes, there are contradicting examples in all across the Aryan literature. At some places you'll see that even Sudras were allowed to do, allowed to read scriptures and whatnot. And other places you'll see that there are controversial statements like you can murder a Sudra without any punishment. So, okay, these are all conflicting ideas. What does this tell you? Okay, yes, there was competition, but you cannot assume that all the four Varnas were in a perpetual state of war against each other. They were not in perfect harmony, but they were not in perfect animosity as well. Okay, whatever misunderstanding, whatever conflicts there might have been, you can safely and in all probability consider them as fringe elements. Okay, that does not speak about the core. Next is the most glaring evil of the Varna system, namely the doctrine of impurity communicated by touch or contact of lower castes, known as untouchability today, had not yet reared its ugly head. So up until even the Upanishads, okay, we just discussed that whole time frame. The earliest pristine form, then the Rigvedic form, then the Brahmana form, then the Aranyakas, then the Upanishads. So in the very last stage, still there is no description of untouchability. Okay. Next is the marriage and position of women. Okay, there are evidences that marriage did not normally take place before puberty. I'll repeat that again for those of you who missed it. R.C. Majumdar on page number 456 writes, there are evidences that marriage did not normally take place before puberty. But weren't we told in our schools that child marriage is an exclusive problem in the subcontinent of Bharat? Think about it. Though marriage within the Gotra was not explicitly prohibited, marriages outside the Gotra must have been more frequent. Brothers and sisters were not to marry before their elders, so the order of birth was generally respected. Polygamy undoubtedly prevailed. Okay. The sale of a daughter was known but viewed with disfavor. Dowries were generally given. The various types of marriage detailed in the later law books had not been formulated as yet. Okay, I'm not going to like hide things that are written in this book. I know these things are difficult to hear, but yes, these things were part of our belief and the faith system. But the good part is, we were mature enough to let it go. We were not orthodox, we were not rigid in our mindset to hold on to these things when these things had clearly outlived their lifespan. Okay, although initially child marriage was not a part of our faith system, it might have gotten into the society due to multiple reasons. We can sit down and contemplate how exactly did it started. Okay, but even if we assume that yes, indeed it was a part of our original faith or belief system, okay, we were mature enough to give it up. We have made it illegal. All right, that's all for this episode of Ancient History of Bharat. I hope you are enjoying this. If you are, share it with other people. Share it with people who think they have misunderstood the history and culture of this country. And I would say there are many people who have misunderstood this country because they have largely read the textbooks that were written by so-called historians. Alright, so yes, that's it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.